Hello and welcome to my Highland sword guide. In this guide you will learn how to be an absolute beast in the team objective mode using the Highland sword. But what makes the Highland sword so good and why is it considered to be one of the best weapons? The Highland sword has the highest base damage on horizontal swings and overhead attacks in the game. The horizontal swing deals 60 damage and the overhead deals an insane amount of 85 damage. So just with your light overhead attacks you can kill every class except the knight with 2 hits. And if you hit a knight 2 times with light overhead attacks he will only have 5 HP left. So overall the Highland sword really hits like a truck. And now if you combine insane damage with a ridiculously long attack range, you get the Highland sword. The only real downside to this weapon is how slow the wind-up time for attacks is. But even this can be used to your advantage, because it enables you to delay your attacks a lot, which can really throw off your opponents. Alright, now let's start with the first and also one of the most important tips. Use ripostes and counters in group fights. Since the Highland sword has a really slow wind-up time for attacks, it is really easy to be interrupted, because there is a high chance that you will get hit first in group fights by faster weapons. In order to avoid being interrupted, you simply have to successfully counter or riposte. If you successfully counter or riposte, you will be blocking incoming attacks in front of you for roughly half a second while attacking. And as I already said, this is really one of the most important tips for the Highland sword, because this will enable you to get a lot more hits through, resulting in an absurd amount of kills when done right. So what you generally want to do in big group fights is to only swing when you're riposting or countering an attack. So you have this little time frame where you block every incoming attack. Because if you just start swinging randomly in a group fight with your slow weapon, then there's a high chance that you will get interrupted before you hit anybody. And right now you will see an example of a successful counter attack. I block and I see that my enemy is performing an overhead strike, so I mirror his input right before he hits me. And as I already said, you will block incoming attacks for roughly half a second when doing this. And this also works with ripostes, as you're seeing now. If you pay close attention, you will see me block the attack from the right by performing a riposte after being hit from the left. And being able to block while attacking can really make a huge difference in group fights, so keep this tip in mind. And if you're unsure how to use a riposte or counter, then feel free to watch my beginner's guide and jump to the timestamp that says riposte and counter. But to sum it up quickly, you riposte by striking right after blocking a hit, and you counter by holding your block and then using the same type of attack as your enemy briefly before he hits you. Alright, now let's move on to the second tip, and in the following clip you will also see how effective this tip can be right away. And the second tip is, don't let enemies get behind you. Since you can only block incoming attacks in front of you, you really don't want anybody to get behind you. So move in a way which makes it hard for the enemies to get behind you, and get used to dashing a lot in group fights, since dashing allows you to quickly get some distance to your enemies. And if you utilize the range of your Highland sword properly, while also paying attention to your footwork and also dashing a lot, then you can kill whole groups alone. Now let's move on to tip number 3. Use heavy swings in group fights, but keep in mind that there's a high risk but also a high reward when doing that. Heavy swings can be a really useful tool in group fights. Whenever an enemy successfully counters your light attack, then your attack will not continue, so you won't hit as many enemies as you could have hit. To avoid this and make your swing cleave through every enemy in reach, you have to use heavy attacks, since they will not stop, even if an enemy successfully counters. So if there would have been any enemies to the right side of the enemy that I'm fighting, I would have not hit them, because he used a counter attack and made my light attack stop. But if I would have used a heavy attack here, then my attack would have continued. So whenever an enemy in a group fight performs a counter attack against your light attack, you will miss out on a lot of possible hits. But keep in mind that heavy attacks take a longer time to wind up than light attacks, so the chance of you being interrupted is higher. And also keep in mind that heavy attacks cost stamina, so don't use heavy attacks when you're already low on stamina. Alright, tip number 4. Switch targets during group fights. Whenever you're in a group fight, it can be really helpful to switch away from your main target or main targets and strike somebody who is not anticipating it. It always amazes me how often this works. Almost always when I switch the target during a group fight, I will get a free hit. And this clip right here is the perfect example. The vanguard on the right side was my main target, and the footman also thought that the vanguard was my main target. So after blocking, I switched to the footman because he was not anticipating that I would hit him. And like in most cases when switching targets during group fights, you will get your free hit. The next tip, tip number 5, is to flank the enemy group whenever you can. Since the Highland sword deals an absurd amount of damage and has a really good reach, every successful strike can easily be a kill. And how do you hit enemies as easy as possible? Correct, from the side or from behind, where they can't block. And although this is a general gameplay tip and not something specific to the Highland sword, I still wanted to put this tip into this guide because flanking works especially well with the Highland sword. And this is the case because it deals just so much damage and just a couple strikes can result in multiple kills, and by flanking you also don't have such a high chance of being interrupted as in normal group fights. So you basically make up for the slow wind-up time by flanking to some degree. Now let's get to tip number 6. Accelerate and delay your strikes. The Highland sword is the slowest weapon in-game, but you can use this to your advantage. By accelerating or delaying your strikes, you can either hit your enemy extremely fast or really late, and both actions can really throw off your opponents. You accelerate your strikes by either turning towards your enemy when slashing horizontally, or by looking down when performing an overhead attack. And you delay your strikes by turning away from your enemy when slashing horizontally, or looking up when performing an overhead attack. In this duel you can see me do both. And delaying my strikes actually made me win this duel. And now I want to show you a good example for delaying a strike. You turn away from your enemy while slashing horizontally to make your weapon hit him as late as possible. Now let's move on to the next tip, get used to feinting. Since the Highland sword is such a slow weapon, your enemies will be able to easily block your attacks most of the time. To make your attacks less predictable, you definitely want to incorporate feints into your gameplay. You will be surprised how often you will hit an enemy if you feint from a horizontal slash into an overhead attack. So definitely get used to feinting, especially in 1v1 situations. In group fights it's a bit more risky because you want to hit your opponents as quickly as possible most of the time in order to not be interrupted. And now let's move on to tip number 8. You can one-hit archers with heavy overhead attacks. Your heavy overhead attack deals 100 damage, so it will always one-hit archers. So keep this in mind and no archer is ever going to get away from you anymore. Tip number 9. Don't use your special attack in group fights. And although it seems kinda counterintuitive because it's a 360-degree strike, you really don't want to use your special in group fights. You can easily be interrupted when using your special attack, and your special attack also only deals 55 damage, so a horizontal slash deals more damage than the special attack. But I found a pretty good use case for your special attack. It can be pretty good in duels. Normally when you use your special attack you're stuck in a pretty long animation. But there is a way to cancel the animation if you hit somebody. If you hit somebody with your special attack while holding your block button, the animation will cancel. Now you will see me use my special attack while holding the block, and I will not do the full 360-degree turn. Doing this in duels can be really effective since your enemies can't really read what you are doing, and most of them will actually think you are performing a horizontal slash, so they input their horizontal slash to counter it, only to get hit by your special attack. Alright, now let's get to the bonus tip, to the cheesy dueling technique. With this dueling technique you will win against roughly 80% of people on duel servers, and it's, just ridiculous. And how exactly does it work? Well, you only riposte attacks and you don't counter attacks. And you try to accelerate your overhead attacks as much as possible by crouching and looking down. And why exactly does this work so well? The Highland sword has the highest base damage for overhead strikes, so it also drains a lot of stamina when your enemy can't counter your attack. And by accelerating your overhead so much, by crouching and looking down, your enemy will almost have no chance to counter your attack because it will be so fast and so unreadable. And riposting makes your attack even faster. So with a couple hits you will have the whole stamina of your enemy drained. And there are also ways to refine this cheesy dueling technique. You can throw in jabs every now and then when you're really close to your enemy. You can also kick from your crouched position every now and then, which is also not really readable for your enemy. And the most important thing is to use a different type of attack as soon as you see blue sparks. Blue sparks mean that your enemy has countered your attack, so he won't lose any stamina. In the following slow-mo you will see blue sparks, which means that he countered, so I immediately switch to a horizontal slash instead of an overhead attack, and I get a free hit. And why exactly do I get a free hit? Well, my enemy almost has to gamble that I perform an overhead strike to be able to counter it, because it is so fast and accelerated. And if you use almost only overhead attacks, at some point in the duel your enemy will only try to counter overhead attacks. This makes it really easy to hit him with another type of attack. Alright, that's it for my Highland sword guide. If you have any recommendations for topics that I should make a video about, please comment. And if you enjoyed this guide, then please like the video and subscribe to my channel. And also feel free to follow me on Twitch, the channel is in the description. Thanks a lot for watching and see you on the battlefield!